Welcome back. All right, I want to talk about the things from a Canadian perspective today, just for fun, just for something fun to do. Hopefully that doesn't bother people too much. But anyways, yeah, I want to talk about this, and you'll notice that I've got new magnets on the board. I ordered a set of decals for the Calgary Flames because I needed a new Flames magnet after my wonderful little rabbit Cinnabon had gotten a hold of one and chewed it up. And she chewed it up enough that I can't keep using it. Corner of the C's been chewed out. I still have it just in case the Flames have a really rough season. Maybe that's the magnet I'll use where it's not really the full Flames logo. But when I ordered the replacements, I didn't realize that this was going to be part of it. And when I saw, first off, there's also a Calgary magnet that is Alberta. So it's the Alberta map. And I'm like, okay, so Edmonton doesn't exist. But when I saw Canada, I was like, wow, so Canada's team. And that's where the genesis of this video idea came from. And of course, I had to get all of them because this wouldn't make a lot of sense if I just had Calgary with the map of Canada. This is where I'll point out if you're on Vancouver Island, according to this map of Canada, nope, not Canada. So apologies because I don't see on any of these maps Vancouver Island, which I'm pretty sure is part of Canada. Not only that, but like Haida Gwaii, there's a lot of West Coast that's just kind of smoothed right out. So we'll go from west to east in terms of National Hockey League teams. And again, not taking this too seriously, but there's a question to be asked here. Boston Pete's asked it during the playoffs. I'm sure they'll add it during this year's playoffs too. The idea of Canada really getting behind a team. Can Vancouver be that team? Now, in 2011, it wasn't, right? Now, this past season, they finished 50, 23, and 9. Their Stanley Cup odds are at plus 1,800. I used a different site for the odds than the one I was using for the season previews because got to change things up. Now, Vancouver doesn't have a Stanley Cup, and I think the fact that the team's never had a Stanley Cup, and in this year's Hockey News Annual, they're picked as the next team to win a Stanley Cup that has never won the Stanley Cup before by a few different writers associated with the Hockey News, which I kind of shook my head and thought, man, I hope that's true, but we'll see. So I went with a core four for all four teams, or all seven teams. Core four for all seven. There we go. JT Miller, I think Pedersen, Hughes, Demko, that'd be the core four if you're going to name four guys from Vancouver. The first thing that stands out, none of those players are Canadian. There's always the discussion of how many Canadians a team has and how Edmonton had a lot of Canadian players. So did Florida. To be fair, so did Florida in that final. But that is an argument that people use against Vancouver, that there's a lot of Swedish and American players. I don't really care. I don't care what country they're from. If the Canucks win, great. Now, Jay Fresh did a survey where he basically asked fans, okay, these teams are against each other. Who are you rooting for? And he came up with a hierarchy for all 32 teams. And the Canucks this summer actually were fifth out of 32 teams. So that tells you that hockey fans around the league kind of like the idea of the Canucks being a good team. And I think that tells you that they're probably the most likely for people to get behind of these seven teams. But we'll go through it. Now, social media ranking, which is ranking all of the various social media accounts, how many followers you have, they're eighth. Now, the one thing with social media ranking is that's not always fans, though. Sometimes it's people that want to troll that team or they want to laugh at that team, and so they follow waiting for chances to laugh. All right. Edmonton finished the season 49, 27, and 6. Their Stanley Cup odds, the best on this website as well, plus 800. Their last Stanley Cup was 1990. And so it's been a long time since any Canadian team won a Stanley Cup. The Oilers have 5 to their credit in their history. Their core 4, for me anyways, I went with McDavid and Draisaitl, obviously, and then I went with Bouchard and Nugent Hopkins. And what stands out there is McDavid's Canadian, Bouchard's Canadian, Nugent Hopkins, pretty sure Canadian as well. Draisaitl, of course, German, but we can make him an honorary Canadian, sure. Now, in Jay Fresh's survey, they were the 9th most popular team. And in terms of social media ranking, they're 10th. So, again, looking across, what that tells me is the most likely for Canada to get behind would be Vancouver, but Edmonton will be a close second. This is where people are already typing, I'm never getting behind the Oilers. It's just for fun. Now, Calgary finishes the season 38, 39, and 5. Their Stanley Cup odds, they're not there. Plus 7,500. That's a lot. Their last Stanley Cup, 1989, so 1 year before the most recent Stanley Cup for the Oilers. Of course, the difference being that's Calgary's only Stanley Cup to this point. getting a core four with Calgary, a little difficult because you have to come up with players who probably aren't getting traded. I went with Coleman, Kadri, Huberdeau because of the length of that contract. I went with him ahead of Backlund. And I went with Anderson because I wanted to put one of the defensemen on the board. I felt like Rasmus Anderson probably not going anywhere. This team was 17th on JFresh's survey, and they're 25th on social media ranking. Keep in mind that coming off of a tough year, it is difficult to say, oh, I'm rooting for them against certain teams, right? So I think for Calgary, that's 17th. I think it would come up in the event that this team got better. Now, odds are the Flames are going to be going through a rebuild for a while here, so Canada getting behind them and rooting for them probably won't be happening for a little while, but in the event that that changes soon, I could see myself rooting for Calgary. It could. Winnipeg, 52-24-6 this past season, plus 2,500 in terms of cup odds, so below Vancouver, Edmonton, and Toronto there. No Stanley Cups for Winnipeg. I think fans would rally around Winnipeg. Of the 7 teams on the board, that's the one that I think it would be easiest to get people to rally around. If Winnipeg went all the way to a Stanley Cup final, I think everybody in Canada would be rooting for them. That being said, there'll be people in the comments telling me why I'm not right. But their core four, I went with Scheifele and Hellebuck, obviously with the contracts they've got signed, and Connor and Morrissey. I would have had Ehlers up there, but it feels like Connor's less likely to end up out of Winnipeg with the rumors this summer being as they've been and everything. Although Ehlers is still there right now, who knows, right? So they're 10th in JFresh's survey of, again, the 32 teams in the league and what fans think. And they're 24th in social media ranking. They are a small market team. And as such, I can totally understand them having less of a social media following than others. And they haven't been in the center of any kind of massive controversy. And they did have a pretty good regular season, but they haven't had like long runs in the postseason. I totally get why social media ranking, they'd be a little bit lower. Then we get to Toronto. Now, what's interesting with Toronto is 46-26-10 record, plus 1,300 in terms of their Stanley Cup chances for this year. Their last Stanley Cup win, 1967. It gets mocked a lot. I don't want to say anything regarding that here other than just that. But their core four, we know their core four, don't we? Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares. And Nylander signed long-term. Matthews is sticking around. The question marks, of course, are Marner and Tavares and what they're going to do there. And then in the event they move one or the other, that would, I think, slip Morgan Riley into the core four, barring them picking up somebody in a move with Tavares or Marner. Apologies for the pausing. I went outside, and it seems to have really thrown off my allergies today. Anyways, with the Leafs, unless they move Marner and Tavares and they get somebody else in who's going to be part of a core four, I think that's where Morgan Riley would slide in. They are 24th in JFresh's survey of whose fans root for. And it's going to be tough for Toronto. But in the event that Toronto, let's just say Toronto gets out of the second round this year and gets into a conference final, would the country rally around Toronto? I don't think it necessarily would. I could see a situation where, let's say, Edmonton's on a run, Toronto's on a run, where Canadian fans would be very excited to potentially see 2 Canadian teams against each other in the Stanley Cup final, which would guarantee that the whole drought in Canada would be over. They are second in social media ranking. Again, remembering some of the people following them on social media may very well not be fans of the team. Ottawa, 37-41-4 this past season, plus 4,000 is their chance of making it and winning a Stanley Cup. They do not have a Stanley Cup with this current franchise. Yes, the Ottawa Senators, the original Ottawa Senators, did win their share of Stanley Cups. I went through all the historical stuff this summer, which everybody watched, right? No? Really? Anyway, this organization does not have a Stanley Cup. It feels like they're a ways out from it. Now, their core four, and I had to look through their roster thinking, okay, who do I want to put as a core four? Remember, Tkachuk and Stützle were easy. Sanderson, relatively easy based on his contract. They clearly believe in him going forward. And I went with Thomas Chabot as well. So, I went with 2 forwards and 2 defensemen. I think they're the only team that I have 2 defensemen in that core four. Now, they were 21st in JFresh's survey, but keep in mind that for Calgary and Ottawa, these are teams that are not contending teams. They're not teams that made the playoffs. So it'd be easy to say, okay, I would root for this team over Ottawa because they're a better team or various reasons you might have. They are 30th in social media ranking. So for Ottawa, I do think that the fact they have not been relevant when it comes to the playoffs in a long time now is part of the reason why we see that erosion. I think a new building and some upward trajectory when it comes to their ability to play hockey and get some victories, I think that would go a long way to fixing the issue. And I do think Canada would rally around Ottawa. I think that's an obvious one, personally, to me. Now, we get to Montreal, 30, 36, and 16 this past season, plus 12,000, the odds of them making the Stanley Cup final and winning it. I know there are some Hab fans that are excited about this coming season. I've seen some talking about, maybe playoffs, maybe playoffs. I don't think playoffs are in the offing for Montreal yet. I think they're building up. I think they should be at least 500 this year. That's about where I would put Montreal. Their last Stanley Cup, of course, 1993, the most recent of any of the Canadian teams on the board. Suzuki, Caulfield, Slafkovsky, and I felt like Matheson's one I'm putting up there as kind of a placeholder. I think their ultimate core players they're building around are still going to be guys like Demidov, maybe Reinbacher, maybe Hudson, guys who haven't got up onto the team and played enough for me to have them part of the core four. I'm saying that the core four is going to be evolving over time, and it's going to end up including, I think, those players. Hudson, Demidov being two obvious ones to me, and so we'll see. They're 16th in Jay Fresh's survey, which again makes sense. Not a playoff team, right? 4th in social media ranking. So let's just say, and I'll round it out this way, the most likely to rally Canada around them, I would say the last one would probably be Toronto. And I say that because there are plenty of fans in Canada that would not necessarily want to see Toronto succeed come playoff time. I'm not feeling that way at all. And before anybody goes, oh, it clearly hates Toronto, listen, the better Toronto does in the playoffs, the better the channel does. And it definitely does affect your opinion on things. So when Toronto got knocked out in the first round by Boston, I did turn to my wife, and you can ask her and she'll tell you, did turn to my wife and say, well, that's going to hurt the channel. And so that is a completely different reaction than what I would have had, say, 8 or 9 years ago. But it definitely means that I'm totally on board for the Toronto Maple Leafs going all the way to the Stanley Cup and me going to Disneyland again. So number 7 would be, I could go the day after, we can go for a month. But that's Toronto at 7th. Now 6th. See, to me, 6th would be, this is where it gets kind of difficult. I'm going to say Calgary. I'll say Calgary because I think Canuck fans and Oiler fans would probably be very much along the lines of no to Calgary. Now, this does cancel out other teams. To me, this does cancel out other teams. Number 5 on the board. I know that social media ranking and all the surveys say that people like the Canucks, but there's part of me thinking no. There's part of me wanting to put the Canucks at 5th, but I'm not going to. I'll put the Sens at 5th, just based on their current standing in the league and everything. I will put... I'll say Winnipeg 4th. I still feel like Vancouver. I'm going to put Vancouver 3rd. I will put the Oilers 2nd. And I'll put Montreal 1st. Look, Montreal's got 24 Stanley Cups. In the event that Montreal went on a run all the way to the Stanley Cup final, as they did in 2021, I think Canada would rally around them, especially if they did so with all these young players they got coming up. Really strong potential core that's on the way up. So I'll go with Montreal. And again, there's nothing scientific in what I just did there, just for fun. I just can't see fans actually rooting for the Canucks in a Stanley Cup final who live in Edmonton or Calgary. I just can't see it. And so that's why I ranked them the way I did. But again, for me personally, I want to see the whole Stanley Cup not coming to Canada argument gone. I'd like to see multiple Canadian teams win a Stanley Cup over the next 5 years. I don't know that we necessarily see it, but I should be here to discuss it when/if that takes place. So let me know your thoughts. Which Canadian team do you think Canada would rally around the most? Which team do you think fans are most likely to say, you know what, we'd love to see them win another Stanley Cup or win a first Stanley Cup? Let me know your thoughts. There are no wrong answers, but let me know why there's wrong answers. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.